That's something that I know I never lose sight of, and the importance of the job that these individuals do. And as I've grown up, kind of in my career, in terms of whether I was from a lifeguard to supervising and running facilities, it was always so important that we give them the tools and support and set them up for success, because they're so critical. And really today, that's what we do. Is our job is, how do we make the lives of our clients and the operations, and ultimately the lifeguards and the staff that they're employing, how do we make their lives easier?
Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros podcast.
Hey, Josh, how are you?
Hey, Matt, I'm doing great. How are you?
I am fantastic.
Wow, you have like a Doppler effect going on there.
Playing with dynamics,
Yeah, the audio guy.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So I got a question for you.
All right.
So when you think of lifeguard, what comes to mind?
I think of someone who is guarding lives.
Go ahead.
At a pool or a beach, some form of body of water where people are swimming, and the lifeguard is there for observation and protection and to act in a blink of an eye if they are needed to save someone's life.
That is a lot to think about.
It is a lot to think about.
That is a lot to think about. And lifeguards have a lot to do and a lot to think about. One thing that I didn't really think about until this interview that we're about to release is lifeguards are really first responders.
Right.
I never thought about it in those terms, but Wess Long, who is the president of StarGuard ELITE, tells us all about lifeguard training and what they go through and how they really are part of the rescue team when it comes to, an emergency situation. Yes, I've thought about that. I've interviewed people to be lifeguards before. I've asked them the swim questions. Can you grab a brick in 10 feet of water and whatever that was? But I never really thought of them as first responders.
Right. Well, and it's so interesting because when we think of our industry, we think of the people who we need on the front line. We've got ride operators, we've got admissions, we've got food and beverage, we've got retail, we've got all this, and lifeguards. It's a frontline position that also has just that greater level of purpose and the importance of their role. That requires additional training and additional certification, additional proficiency to be a frontline employee.
Exactly. And when you think about that level of responsibility, one of the things that Wes kind of helps us understand a little bit better is how that is instilled in someone that doesn't necessarily have a ton of life experience, and he even talks about the difference between a beach lifeguard and a pool or a water park lifeguard. Not that they do drastically different things, but you may have someone that has a little bit less life experience working at a pool or a water park, and they get similar training. They learn CPR and they learn, first aid tactics and what do you do in case there's a drowning and how to spot that. But when you think about the barrier that can actually cause for recruitment, that's another piece that Wes kind of talks through. It really is such a heightened responsibility that I kind of get a cringe or a twinge when somebody says, oh, they're just sitting up on stand and getting a tan.
Right. Right, exactly. You talked about the training and everything that they go through, and for many people, they are early on in their career. They are younger. It might be one of their first jobs, and he talks about the way that training has changed, and that they don't do it classroom style training. It's all about experiential learning, which is about doing, but also talking about what they're doing and why they're doing it as well. Because the content really needs to be able to stick before they go out and they are on their own and they're up on the stand, or they're watching over the lazy river or the wave pool, or whatever it is that there's just so much that needs to make sure it isn't just delivered, but that it is truly received as well.
Yeah. And one of the things he talked about regarding StarGuard ELITE, the company that he is the president of, is how they are very client-centric. And that, yes, you have standards, yes, you have procedures, but their approach is there's lots of different ways to get there, and each facility is different. So they need to have kind of their own stamp of approval, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's as long as kind of the core standard is there are multiple avenues, multiple ways you can approach it. It might differ from one organization to another. It might even differ from one location to another within the same organization. He shares how those differences kind of work and really interact with each other as well.
So what do you say? Is it time to dive into this interview with Wess?
Go right off the deep end.
Wess Long, welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast. How you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. It's awesome to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So excited to chat with you. Can you give people a little bit of an idea of kind of who you are and what it is that you do?
Sure. So my name's Wes, and I have been working in the aquatics industry, primarily in the attractions world, for a better part of 25 plus years now. And I started, like a lot of people in the aquatics industry, I started working in a water park as a lifeguard. Growing up in a military family, moved around quite a bit. My parents retired in Florida. I went to University of Central Florida because at the time they let me in, and anyway, so I was at school at UCF. I was working at a golf course. Had been doing it for a while. It wasn't really, my favorite thing in the world. I heard an advertisement that Disney was hiring for lifeguards, and I remember like flashback to my days as a young kid and going to really big Kahuna's water park in Destin, Florida. And I was like, oh, that sounds fun. I called them and they say, yeah, come in for an interview. Went in for an interview. Next day it was a swim test. I was certified and I was on the stand, and it just kind of happened. And then I just found I really enjoyed working in the environment. It's busy. There's always something going on. And, I didn't realize at the time, working at Disney, and particularly in the mid to late 90s, their water parks were really cutting edge and, industry leading in a lot of ways. And so I got some tremendous experience. And then from there, I finished school and just kind of never left the industry, always been around it. And then grew into operations of a variety of different areas, both domestically and overseas. And then about 8 years ago, I had the opportunity to join a company that was doing management consulting, and partnered with the Starfish Aquatics Institute, who is the founder of StarGuard. And out of that, we, in 2014, created a StarGuard ELITE as a brand, if you will, to offer another option to the aquatics industry from a training and support perspective. And then in 2018, we formed it into its own standalone company, at which I've been the president for StarGuard ELITE since that time. I still consider myself an operator at heart, but I've really been on the provider side for about 8 years now.
And how do you use the time that you had early in your career as a lifeguard, really being able to influence what you do today and being able to kind of draw back on that experience that I can imagine was so pivotal, so crucial during that time?
Yeah, absolutely. And, and thinking about, the role of a lifeguard, right. And how much responsibility we put on lifeguards, especially in the private sector and in the public sector, it's honestly not much different, where, there's an emphasis on efficiency and staffing costs. How do we manage it? How do we, and then honestly, today staffing is even a challenge to find enough people. So maximizing your efficiency from that standpoint. And so when you put we take one lifeguard and you put them in a position where they singularly solely are responsible for this area, it's something that I know I never lose sight of, and the importance of the job that these individuals do. And as I've grown up kind of in my career, in terms of whether I was from a lifeguard to supervising and running facilities, it was always so important that we give them the tools and support and set them up for success, because they're so critical. And really today, that's what we do. Is our job is, how do we make the lives of our clients and the operations, and ultimately the lifeguards and the staff that they're employing, how do we make their lives easier and provide them the tools and resources they need to be successful in their job? Because the opposite side of that, if something happens, and the emotional toll and everything that everybody lives with, not just the individuals involved, but the people who respond and everything else, it's so great. So it's critical that we all understand that and really empathize with that role of a lifeguard. And so starting in industry, growing up in it, I'd liken it to how kind of like, the football coaches who played, have a different perspective than someone who maybe came into it from the other side. And I think that's always really important, is to never lose sight of that, coming from those roots, if you will.
Wes, you mentioned the emotional toll that something might take, like if something happens at a pool or at a water park, and certainly that can take a huge toll on the entire staff and any guard that might be in that area. But even on the side, if nothing happens, there's a lot of emotion that probably gets a lot of emotion and intensity that gets poured out just into watching the water and doing their scans and that kind of thing. And I'm wondering if you can kind of walk us through a little bit, what kind of training and specific skills those lifeguards are going through. Because, when somebody sees them up on stand and they don't know what they've been through, they're just thinking, here's a teenager on stand. Should I really trust them with my life?
Oh yeah. No, and honestly, it's a challenge in our industry as a whole. And I think a lot of it, if you think about lifeguarding as a whole in the United States, for example, you have beach rescue lifeguards, and you have pool and water park and resorts lifeguards. And a lot of times they're not really seen as the same. And that's unfortunate for a lot of ways. But a lot of that just honestly stems from the fact of age. You look at a lot of public beach lifeguards, and you think about like in places like California. I mean, their lifeguards are amazing, and they do some amazing things on the beaches, and not just there. Really, really all over the world. But using that kind of that mindset, they're looked at more in that fire department, police, first responder mindset, versus if you go to your average water park or pool or resort, a lot of times you see a young adult. And so a lot of the natural, just because of their age and kind of their physical appearance, you don't give them maybe that same level of respect or understanding of what they've gone through. And these young adults, they truly are professionals. They're rescue professionals. They are part of the emergency medical, services line of defense, if you will, in that regard. And that's one of the things that, there's a guy in our industry named Joey Resnack out of Canada. And he runs a great organization, a great Facebook group called Lifeguard Authority, and they do a lot of stuff, education and different stuff. But he talks about changing that paradigm and that perception of seeing lifeguards as rescuers, as first responders, and in that kind of that same realm. And so, how do we train them? Is a lot of it stems back from there's some stuff that's very objective driven, and I'll consider CPR and first aid kind of as one of those objective driven. The lifeguard training and CPR they go through is the same as police officers, firefighters, other healthcare professionals, in the sense that it's basic life support that includes, cardiac care, use of AED, talking about emergency oxygen, rescue breathing, all of these different elements. And the whole idea is that they are going to sustain life until further help can get there, and advanced cardiac life support and other elements that really need either hospital care or at least ambulatory care can take over. And so they get that training. But then in addition to that, they have to be able to swim. They have to be proficient swimmers, obviously. But then we have to one of the things that's really changed a lot since when I was a lifeguard first certified, in the mid 90s versus today, is we put a lot of emphasis on understanding what drowning looks like and how the drowning process occurs and how we can interrupt that, and having them understand their importance in that role. And a lot of it really relates to time. It's identification and then time. The sooner we can identify, the sooner we can get there and provide treatment. Interrupting the drowning process, if they're in that process of unresponsiveness and things like that, becomes so important. And so what we do is we try to simplify all that, and I think we overall as an industry do a really good job. And I know at SGE, what we really put a lot of emphasis on is experiential learning and getting them talking and training, not very classroom driven, not very instructor focused, but very much trying to get them active in that process so they learn it. So then when they get on stand, they're confident in what they're looking for. God forbid something happens, what their role is to do, and understanding the team element and all those other layers to it. So there's a lot of objective, just kind of checklist items, right? Where I'm going to teach you how to do compressions, how to open airways, how to perform extrications. But there's a lot of emotional element to it too, of understanding the importance and them buying in. Because if I sit here and I tell you, hey, this is what drowning looks like, you need to look for it. But if they don't buy into understanding their role and their importance of it and why it's, that they have to take that ownership and responsibility, it really becomes a challenge to actually have a successful, a successful operation, successful, period as a lifeguard, if you will, unless you really truly understand and are, kind of bought into what it is you're doing.
So you gave us an overview there of the experiential learning, and I'm wondering, I would love it if we could maybe dive even deeper,
yeah,
no pun intended, or get a little more granular in terms of what that really looks like. So you said kind of the difference between classroom training and just getting the information.
Yeah.
What does that learning process look like, and what the lifeguards go through?
I mean, and it's a great question, because oftentimes people think experiential just means that people doing, and the reality is experiential is them being engaged in it, to talk about it, to be not just simply one direction. Where you think about a lot of classroom training. I know, so I went to a large public university, and sometimes we had one instructor teaching 300 plus students, and these massive classes, and it's literally a teacher with a PowerPoint or some sort of other, here giving you all the information, but you're just sitting there taking it in, and then you do some sort of a electronic test, something else later, and that's not experiential at all. And so when some things that we focus on experiential is not only have them physically getting up and doing, but also talking about it and engaging those questions. So even sometimes on sessions where maybe you can't really make it an actual activity or something that they're doing, doing CPR is easy, right? Because you can physically work on a mannequin, open up the airway, practice compressions, doing those things. Doing other stuff, understanding the drowning process, it would be very one directional if you just get up and run a PowerPoint or play a video and here it is. But you got to get them talking about it and maybe relating some experiences, and then outside doing activities, trying to mimic, the types of activities, because we put a lot, for example, one of the things we talk about is, how much adults learn and retain, and how they learn. And, 90% of what they say and do and what they talk about and they physically do, then they have that retention. And so that's where the experiential component is. And, we've seen, I think as a whole, we're seeing a lot more transition to that, even in some traditional educational elements. But versus, hours and hours of presentation, but it's something that we do from the very get-go. We have classes immediately, students are up, they're talking, they're doing stuff, they're engaged, because we're trying to set that standard that this is what it's going to be like, and then they ultimately retain more.
Wes, one of the things that I've noticed, I've not worked at a water park, but I've been to WWA many times and worked with a lot of water parks as a consultant. But a lot of times you find that the bond between lifeguards is very, very deep. Again, no pun intended, but you don't see that with folks working maybe in other departments throughout a park or, a facility. I'm wondering if some of that comes from all of that time they spend together training, all of that experiential, emotional training that they go through. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the bond that lifeguards have?
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because I'm reflecting back to my wedding. And I had 5 guys in my in my groomsmen, and I think 4 of them were guys I lifeguarded with, and at some point I worked with in the industry, and a couple of them are still, still very engaged in the industry to this day. I think a lot of it, it stems kind of what you talked about. It starts at the training, and it starts at kind of that understanding and being out there doing it. Probably not that all that different than what you see sometimes with like professional athletes, or you see with other, people who maybe work in positions that you don't really understand and truly empathize with unless you do it. I know that I have a lot of buddies who are firefighters, and similar, right? Where there's that kind of that similar camaraderie between them. I think that for a lot of young adults, being a lifeguard, it becomes part of their identity. And it's someone kind of who they are. A lot of lifeguards will, one of the first things to tell you is I'm a lifeguard, versus maybe say they work at the local grocery store, or they do some other type of a job. May not be part of their immediate identity, just because it is kind of a badge of honor, and it's something they had to work hard to get that certification. They maintain it. There's a certain level of expectation that comes with that whether I'm on duty or not, now I have these skills, I have this ownership, I have these responsibilities. And, and I think you talk to most people who've been lifeguards, and the majority of us have used skills outside of work far as much, if not more, than we have within our operating environments, because, just nature of what you're learning and what you do.
Is there a typical career path for a lifeguard? You were talking earlier about, you said they're part of the emergency response team. There's there's the training, there's the professional skills with it. And if you think of, whether it's at a water park, you've got your lifeguards and your admissions attendant, your retail, your food and beverage. But as far as, being a lifeguard, I can imagine that there might be a little bit of a different career path, and so many transferable skills. Do a lot of people, become paramedics and EMTs? Do they become firefighters, or do they often, or is there a lot of in-house development to keep them within aquatics as well?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. Just for the sheer numbers of lifeguards that are trained every year, I would say majority of them probably find themselves in other career paths longer term, but lifeguarding is kind of a entryway into. I mean, I know a number of lifeguards that I worked with at my days at Walt Disney World that are now firefighters or other level of EMS. Our medical director for SG, our chief medical director, Justin Simstrat, he started as a lifeguard at Jack's Beach. And he was at Jacksonville Beach and was an ocean surf lifeguard, and and he did that with the intention on became a doctor out of that, because some of the education, information, and things he was learning, he felt like could be different, and ultimately stayed on that career path. And so you definitely see that where lifeguarding opens up a door into other EMS and health, first responders, healthcare providers, things like that. One of our clients I was just talking to yesterday is finishing up nursing school and is going to become a nurse, and has been doing this, but got into nursing based from her lifeguard experience, and figured out, hey, maybe this is something I'm interested in. I think within the aquatics industry, though, one of the things that we always are trying to impart on young adults is that a lot of times that they take the approach that this is just a summer job or a seasonal job or something temporary, that there is a lot of opportunity in our industry. And, the one thing that about aquatics industry is that it's just exploding. And the number of facilities that we see that are adding water parks or expanding their aquatic elements, cities that every year they're adding, or every few years they're adding new aquatic facilities. It is far from a zero-sum game, in the sense that just because that person may be young and in this position, there's not going to be a lot of other opportunity. And always trying to engage the young adults and to stay within the industry and keep growing. For me personally, I took a path that a lot of water park senior management took, where I was a lifeguard into a supervisor, into a manager, director, general manager role. And, and I did that path. We see that, a lot of the people in the industry have taken that same route, but then there's a lot of people that have come from other ways or other areas. But if someone's entering the career now, or if they're say they are a supervisor or a manager, I mean, the number of opportunities are out there. As long as if you're willing to move, the opportunities are amazing, and one time I was asked, what do you attribute some of your being able to grow in this industry? And I said, because I'll pick up and move, and I mean, I'll go wherever the opportunities are. And I tell people all the time, it's like, if you have someone in front of you who's blocking your potential growth, but you're willing to move, let me tell you, there's 20 other opportunities probably out there, and you just have to be willing to make that change. And some people are, and some people aren't, and that's understandable.
Wes, since we're talking about staffing and lifeguards, can we talk a little bit about recruiting? Because that's something that people have been dealing with, especially the last couple of years, all over the industry, not just lifeguards, but maybe specifically some of the challenges that you might have in getting enough people in the door so that you can have people that are willing to take those opportunities and move around the country or the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, recruiting, you go anywhere, right? And you see the help wanted ads out and everyone's answer, not everyone, but a lot of answers have been just, let's just throw more money at this, right? We go from $12 an hour to 15 to 18, and I was in a place not too long ago and I saw $22 for a fast food place, and it's just like, wow, I mean, it's just kind of crazy how fast some of this has changed. And so, when I first got into lifeguarding, not only was the idea of it sound fun, but I was going to get an extra 35 cents an hour. And that was a big motivator for me at the time was the money. And what we've noticed though, is that as the rate of minimum wage and hourlies and stuff have increased, that variance, even if it's $1 or $2 an hour, sometimes that's not enough to incentivize, especially with the amount of responsibility. And so when you think about going out and recruiting lifeguards, if you're recruiting all positions, you're just trying to find enough staff. And with lifeguards, it becomes especially difficult because not only do you have to find people who are proficient swimmers and who are up for the job, but then you actually have to train them. And you have to, and lifeguard training itself typically is anywhere from, 22 to 30 hours, kind of depending on the nature of the facility and other demands that are on them. But then once they're trained, you still have to train them on your local procedures. You might have attraction, rules and guidelines and things you have to train them through. And so it can easily be 40 hours of training. Some facilities are able to pay for all of that training. And so, but a lot of them don't, or they can't, especially the training. And so you're going to have to recruit someone. Not only do you have to find them to check all these boxes, now you got to say, oh yeah, by the way, you're willing to invest 25, 30 hours of your own time into taking on this role. And then now guess what? You have a lot more responsibility than maybe someone in, working at another type of position. I'm not going to put any positions down by any means, but a certain amount of responsibility does come. And thankfully, there's still a lot of young adults and people who are very interested in doing those things. But as far as like having the amount of personnel available to us today that we used to have, it's very different. And so we've seen a lot of different efforts in terms of trying to recruit and bring in these people. But it's a challenge. I mean, it really is. And so, from our perspective, I know one of the things that we've done is saying, how do we change this, or what can we do? What can we do differently? And you've seen blended learning come on, and that helps cut down in some of the in-person time commitment that's required, but also revisiting maybe some of the prerequisites that are required. It wasn't that long ago that we used to say everyone has to be able to swim, a certain distance and in this time, and then they have to be able to do these other physical things. And coming back and saying, well, is that necessary for everything? Especially as pools and water parks have become so much more shallow now, where maybe you don't need not say Olympic level swimmers, but you don't need like really, really competitive swimmers. You need people who are proficient in the water, and finding those types of ways to open up the candidate pool more. And so there's a lot of things that have been done, but it's not a challenge that's going to be solved, anytime soon. That's for sure. It's going to take time I think, for the things really get better.
Has the job of a lifeguard changed over the years and evolved? Like from your early days at Disney as a lifeguard, we think about just all jobs these days of just technology being able to improve it, and just different ways that people do the job over time.
Yeah.
Have there been changes to lifeguards, or is it still just the fundamental core components?
I think a lot of the fundamentals are the same, but I think the one thing that's really changed is the understanding the standards and expectations of the lifeguards. In the mid 90s, you go back 25, 30 years, and a lot of lifeguards, it was, hey, go and stand. We put you through your training. There was a lot of unknowns, like, for example, I honestly wasn't trained on really what a drowning person looks like. And we didn't put a lot of emphasis on zones. We said, okay, hey, you watch this area, but not really understanding some of the science and some of the, our responsibility in terms of those zones. And so we've seen that dynamic change quite a bit over the last 15, 20 years. We've seen, certain technologies come out. For sure, the day-to-day job of a lifeguard as a whole is largely the same, in the sense that we're watching a body of water, we're trying to identify anyone in need, perform the rescue, those types of things. But when you talk about the other parts of the job, for example, dispatch and attraction operations, we used to get up, maybe say a spiel and be like, all right, next, that, and then lo and behold, over time, lawsuits happen, litigation, all these regulations and things, and we've become better and more refined as an industry about educating patrons, things to look for. One area that's changed tremendously is attraction operation. I would say that more and more the operators are better trained and better professionals to do their job than they were back in the day. And so that's been a big shift. But in terms of lifeguarding itself, whether I'm working on a wave pool at a water park, or I'm working at a pool in at a city or beach or wherever, the job's largely the same. But I think some of the training and tools and understanding is what's really changed.
Along that line, one of my favorite memes that came out during the kind of the height of the pandemic, and Wes, I'm sure you've seen it, was, we're talking about everybody working from home, and there's that lifeguard on stand in the bathroom watching the person in the bathtub. I just thought that was like really hard to work from home as a lifeguard.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, not something that's easily accomplished. That's for sure.
Exactly. I'm wondering if we can change gears just a little bit and focus specifically on StarGuard ELITE, because one of the things that you talk about specifically on your website is how your approach is very client focused, client based. And so, can you talk a little bit about that and how that informs your decisions and how you work with folks?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that has been very valuable for me is having been an operator in Florida, twice in California at two different facilities, and overseas in Dubai, in Georgia, and then as a consultant or a provider, seeing literally all 50 states, 25 plus countries. Is you see so many types of operations. And the reality is that from my days, even though I was the same and the standards I was trying to implement were the same, every facility I worked at, we operated differently, and even when we had the same parent company, parks would have things, little nuances and things that are different. And so where that drove us, and really my personal vision with this, is that we're not, the prescribed approach of saying, hey, you always do it this way. There's A to B to C to D isn't always the case. The reality is there's objectives and standards, but the routes to get there can be very different. And that's okay, as long as we're meeting those objectives and those standards. And so what we do as a client, as an organization, is we try to understand what are the client needs, what are the industry standards and guidelines that they're going to be expected to meet. From a defensibility standpoint, that's one of the things that we talk about a lot is, hey, we're trying to make, God forbid, something happen. We know that if we do all these procedures, we're setting your team up for the best success, and hopefully they don't ever have the turmoil and then dealing with an incident, and your guests never are part of that. But then if something does happen, then from a defensibility perspective, also being able to feel confident that, yes, you were doing everything you needed. And so understanding all of that, what is the client's, what's their experience, what's their vision, what is it they're trying to, that makes them unique? How can we still embody that, but meet those standards. And so that's where the client-centric approach really comes from. And there's some parts of clients within our organization. I'll use Royal Caribbean cruise ships. They're amazing. I mean, they do such an incredible job, and they're able to really apply a lot of consistency from ship to ship to ship because the operations are very similar. But then we have other park groups and cities and things. Their facilities might operate very differently. Still accomplishing the same standards. And so that's where for us saying what's being client centric, we really try to be a partner and not a provider. It's easy to come in and say, I could go to any pool and say, just double the amount of staff and add all this equipment, and do all these. It's just not realistic, right? It's not feasible. And it's not probably what's best for the business or the operation or whatever as a whole. So that's where really trying to be client focused, understand that, be a partner to them, and have that dialogue back and forth. Trust me, it's not always easiest for us, where we have to be willing to make accommodations or to do things differently. But it's ultimately, if it's what's best for the client, best for their patrons, that's what our mission is.
Mm.
In the event of an incident, can you walk us through just the overall, what the defensibility process looks like?
Yeah, and there's a lot of variables to this as well. Depending upon the where it happens and types of facilities and all of that. Everyone's a little bit different. Typically, you'll have either in-house counsel, maybe external lawyer or someone like that that's going to be involved. Insurance companies. Sometimes it's the owner operator or the management or whoever it is, depending on the type of facility. But in the event that an incident occurs, the immediate is obviously taking care of both the person or persons involved in that incident from a health perspective. That's obviously first and foremost, but then also taking care of the staff and the people that were involved and maybe the other patrons that witnessed it, and what can we do to support them. So that's always the immediate, is what can we do to support this, support these individuals. Then from there, you start stepping back to saying, okay, what were their contributing factors? What led to this incident occurring? What learning lessons is there something wrong? Is there something unsafe? Is there something needs to be changed? Whatever it is, because you obviously don't want that to repeat itself. Okay. And then beyond that, then we get into more of that's part of that analysis and investigation, the expert, some of the expert analysis and stuff involved in that piece of it. And then beyond that becomes, some of those longer term, do you make, if you're making changes, what are they? If it goes into, litigation or anything like that, what's needed? What's the support? I personally take the approach, and we take the approach that, we're not going to try, there's no hiding anything, everything we just assume everything's discoverable, and we don't try to take the approach of we're going to try to protect us or point fingers or anything like that, because the reality is that through the litigation process and everything, if someone has fault, it's going to be found, and you do no good trying to isolate yourself or do anything like that. And so the whole post incident, it's such a multifaceted element, because we didn't even talk about, for example, communications and public communication, media plans and talking to your other patrons. What are those steps? Controlling that messaging. There's lots of basics out there. Again, similar to some of the other. Everything's so unique. You have to take each situation as such. But the one thing that I think we always try to do is if I hear of an incident, whether it was at a client facility or it wasn't, are there learning lessons here? What can I extrapolate? Sometimes all we have is press clippings or hearsay, but is there something there that maybe we need to be focused on to try to, provide that education to our clients or to our staff or whoever to help make sure this doesn't occur again. And I'll use an example. Last year, there was I don't know if maybe it was 2020, but there was an incident that occurred at an inflatable park on a lake. And without having all the facts and everything to that situation. Nonetheless, we knew some of the stuff that was in the press, and so I was able to take that and say, hey, listen, what are some of the things here, and what can we help do to get this message out to our clients who operate similar, just as an extra reminder of, you need to be doing these things. Hopefully they already were, but nonetheless, are there learning lessons there? And so whenever an incident occurs, there's so much that can come out of it in the long term, but it really just depends on kind of exactly what the incident was, who's involved, all of those things before you can really make any next determinations.
Yeah. Wes, I'm curious if we can also talk a little bit about WWA. We've mentioned that a couple of times, and you've been very involved with that association. And for every business, there's a trade association, right? And WWA is the big one for aquatics. How important is it for you, and even for your career, to have been involved in the WWA, the World Waterpark Association?
Yeah, I think a lot of the trade organizations, whether it's World Waterpark Association, IAPA, AOAP is another great one in our aquatics industry. But even beyond that, there's so many in the public sector. There's organizations like ASTM, and others that just do tremendous work to support all of us, and in so many different levels. And I just think it's important that we're involved, and that in a way you could say some of it's giving back, because it is volunteer, and it is, it's extra time and commitment. But I think that you find it to be very rewarding. And, and I'm a big advocate to my team, and to anyone in the industry, to try to get involved and be part of these organizations. And so for me personally, World Waterpark Association was one that I had the opportunity to become involved in as a volunteer, but they're also very receptive and have been very, gracious to me to be able to be involved and, give me opportunities. And so I joined the safety committee, I think about 8 years ago, and I was the chair, or the secretary for it for about 4 years, and then the chair for about 4 years. And doing the work kind of with that committee, it really opened my eyes to a lot more in the industry, in terms of, especially from regulatory and some of the impact that these other organizations have. And so we actually, for a couple of years, did a lot about talking about, getting involved with Aquatic Health Code and the Pool and Hot Tub Alliance and ASTM and those types, because they do all play a very vital role, and their success is also contingent upon the next generation staying involved and continuing to grow and evolve it. And so so for me, WWA was great. And then this year I was offered the opportunity to join the board of directors, and so I'm excited to see it continue to grow and work from a different aspect. I just think, though, that it's the outreach that these organizations are able to have, the education that they can provide, the networking and community that they build. We don't see it in the private sector as much, but the public sector, has state and national level organizations that are tremendous, and we see the same thing there. And so, I think about a place like Chicago and Illinois Parks and Rec Association. They have some just tremendous groups that work together, and really every state does. And so it's just, but however it is, but if you look at those organizations, they're so dependent upon people being involved and engaged and making an effort to not just be a member, but also go to their organizations, their events, support, and do all those things. But then they are able to become a voice and an advocate and use that in so many other ways. And and WWA from a safety and advocacy and other, it's just done some tremendous work, and our industry is better for it. That's for sure.
And in addition to WWA, you briefly mentioned the Model Aquatic Health Code, and the lifeguard training was the first to hold that certification. Can you tell us about that as well?
Yeah, so it was interesting when Model Aquatic Health Code and the MAC, came out with where they were going to release a certification program, and honestly, I had actually had some concerns about kind of what their intentions were with it, and kind of one of my concerns was that that programs that maybe don't hold all of the regulatory approvals, and some of the others would try to get a MAC certification to circumvent some of the other standards. But the Aquatic Health Code has done a really good job of creating a consensus and a kind of a backbone, if you will, for design and operations and so many other elements for aquatics. And so for us, when MAC said they were going to release a certification program, I felt it was important to get out in front of that and to get our program certified, because it really is one of the things I love about the MAC is if you go and you read any of it, it applies to almost any type of aquatic operation. And even though it's not authority in many jurisdictions, it is a great consensus because so many people are involved, and the standards apply on so many levels. And so for us, becoming MAC certified was great, and the fact that we were the first ones to do it for the lifeguard training program, was awesome, and it helped just kind of, I think, reassure our clients that what they're doing is we're keeping them on the forefront and on the the industry standards for safety and operations and everything. It further strengthens those messages that we drive, and we always continue to try to, if there's a new edition that's coming, we don't quite know when it's coming, but it's coming, and once it's released, revisiting it, reevaluating all of our standards, making sure that what we the advice and counsel and stuff that we provide meets the MAC standards.
Wes, you mentioned a little bit ago that you worked in Dubai, and I'm wondering if you can talk just a little bit about what that experience was like living and working over there.
So I had the opportunity to go to Dubai in 2008, which the timing honestly couldn't have been better, because towards the end of that year and the next year, obviously the economy crumbled in the U.S. and there was a lot of challenges, but it was also a great time in my personal life, because my wife and I, we'd just been married, and when we actually moved there, she was pregnant, and both my kids were actually ended up being born in Dubai, and so we were there for 4 years. And I look back on Dubai and reflect very fondly of my time there. Going into it, I think I was probably more than naive about what I was going to encounter and everything like that. I will say that the transition there really wasn't difficult, but for me, what I probably didn't appreciate was the friendships and the understanding of other cultures and in countries and things that I would take away from that. And even to this day, like actually this morning, I was on WhatsApp speaking to 2 or 3 people, friends that I've still maintained from Dubai. They're now all over the world. And, and it was just tremendous. And so being part of, I was part of the opening team with the Atlantis resort there. And I've been part of that for 4 years, and seeing that operation grow and mature and everything, and then seeing how it's continued to grow and evolve since those days, but also be part of it was kind of a bit of a boom at the time going on in Dubai and the Middle East as a whole. And now we've seen that carry into Saudi Arabia and other markets as well. It's really tremendous. And, I just, the thing that I look back on, I probably reflect most fondly on is the people, and the understanding you get. Having met so many people from countries like, Sri Lanka and Kenya and Egypt and, and all parts of Asia, Europe, so many, and it's just incredible. And it really gives you a better understanding of the world in so many ways when you're kind of in a melting pot like that of so many nationalities. And so, yeah, it's been great, and then the family ties to that as well. I mean, it's something I'll always look back and be very fond about.
Yeah, no, I'll bet. So we're starting to run a little low on time here, but we would love to know, what is your favorite thing about working in the aquatics industry?
Well, today my favorite thing for sure is the the ability to travel and see people in new facilities. I was just in Thailand about 2 weeks ago and got to see a couple of different clients and interact with them and the cultures. And then, and then last week I was in Mexico and the same thing there. Right. And so it's like some of that travel, but even around the US, seeing so many different people, it's amazing to me just to see the growth and the continual evolution of and be involved in the grand scheme of things. It's always been the people. I mean, I think, probably say the same thing about a lot of industries, but, I think back about the people that I've worked with, throughout, my career as an operator, and then with, as my career on the provider consultant side of the business. The people are really by far what makes it the best. And, it's just been the doors that this industry has opened up for me, and being able to witness and experience and get to know people and everything has just been awesome.
So Wes, this is the very first episode that's going live in 2023. So thank you very much for being our guest today.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, do you have any, resolutions or things that you're looking forward to in 2023?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always a question that there's constantly something that you want to answer, right? Or things you want to do better at. Professionally, I probably just continue to trust. I'm guilty of always trying to be in the weeds at times, and trying to just delegate and trust my team and do better about that. Personally, probably refocus on my health more. It's easy to get tied up in work and day to day, but get back into, being better about, fitness and doctor's appointments and those types of things. I'm not 20 anymore, so I need to start recognizing that. But no, I think probably just those would focus on those two things, hopefully, and this time next year I'll be in a better spot.
Well, Wes, if people want to learn more about StarGuard ELITE, or if they want to get a hold of you directly, where would you send them?
Yeah, so www.starguardelite.com, StarGuardelite.com. Email is my name, Wes with 2 S's, .long @starguardelite.com. Or we always say info@starguardelite.com. It goes to me and my whole team, and we're always very responsive there. So, it should be easy to Google and find. I'm happy to meet with anyone, talk further, see what we can do to assist.
That's excellent. Thank you, Wes. We will make sure all of that gets into the show notes, and really appreciate your time today. Just great insight into the aquatics industry. So can't thank you enough for that. And for everybody who is out there watching and listening, just remember, we are all attraction pros. Thanks for listening to the Attraction Pros podcast.
Make sure to subscribe so you can tune in when new episodes release, and even better, please leave us a review on iTunes.
For more information, visit attractionpros.com.